I'm Henry R. Mockingbird, your host with the mustache. And for this next block of reviews, we are going to take a look at two of Universal's horror icons, Dracula and Frankenstein. For this review, we are going to take a look at Dracula. And for the next review, we are going to take a look at Frankenstein. So, let us begin this duo of reviews by taking a look at Universal's blood-sucking fiend, Dracula. So, let's get going. The film is about a dashing, mysterious vampire named Count Dracula, who turns a British man named Renfield into his mindless slave, and both of them go to London. And while he's there, he takes residence at a castle and starts sucking the blood out of women and turning them into vampires. He has a target on Miss Mina, the daughter of a doctor. He enlists the help of Professor Van Helsing to put an end to Dracula's reign once and for all. So, my boys and ghouls, what does your host think of this blood-curdling movie? Well, I'll tell you. Well, I like it. Before we start talking about the film itself, let us get into its history. Universal bought both the book rights to Dracula by Bram Stoker and the 1924 stage play. The film was originally intended as a vehicle for Lon Chaney Sr., who was supposed to play Dracula. It was also Universal's answer to lure Lon Chaney Sr. away from MGM. And recently, MGM just had success with Lon Chaney Sr. with his very first sound film, a remake of The Unholy Three, and where Lon Chaney Sr. was being christened from the Man of 1,000 Faces to the Man of 1,000 Voices. And MGM had even planned all sound remakes of his silent films. But sadly, none of this would come to pass, as Lon Chaney Sr. had passed away in 1930. Universal had desperately tried to find a replacement for Dracula. The no-brainer would be Bela Lugosi, since he did play Dracula in the stage play, but oddly enough was not the first person chosen for the role. Many actors were chosen for the role. 3 of them include Paul Haney, who was also Scarface in the 1932 Scarface, John Carradine, who oddly enough would play Dracula in the Frankenstein series, as well as Conrad Veidt, whose previous Universal role was Gwen played in The Man Who Laughs. Bela Lugosi had to send several telegrams begging Universal for the role, until finally they said yes. And the rest, as you could say, is history. The film was a huge milestone for horror. Up until this point, American horror movies rarely focused on the supernatural. They usually focused on a deformed figure like the Phantom in Phantom of the Opera. And when it was supernatural, the supernatural thing would turn out to be fake. Just a guy in a costume. Like in London After Midnight. Speaking of milestones, this movie would be the start of a famous horror cliche, and where you have the main character being warned to not go to a certain location, or else they'll die. Another great thing about this movie is the production design, particularly Dracula's castle, which really looks like it's been lived in. And you could tell with all the bats, spiders, wasps, possums, and armadillos? The hell? Now let's talk about some of the characters. First, there's Dracula, played by Bela Lugosi, who's a blood-sucking womanizer, and quite the ladies' man. But he could also be really damn creepy. Just the way his stare, those devilish, piercing eyes that just stare into your soul and say they're gonna swallow it. And then there's his mindless slave, Renfield, played by Dwight Fry, who eats flies and spiders. And he is crazy, insane. He's a freaking lunatic. And then there's our hero, Professor Van Helsing, played by Edward Van Sloan. Talk about typecasting. But in all seriousness, Van Helsing is a very fascinating character, to say the least. He's the one who discovers that Dracula is the vampire. He shows Dracula's reflection in the mirror, and Dracula whacks it right the freak out of his hand. He also shows Dracula a cross. He is definitely a memorizing character. The less could be said about John Harker, who out of all the leading men in either a monster movie or a horror film, he has got to be the most boring and bland. I mean, Jack Driscoll was not a three-dimensional character, but at least he had the personality traits of being a tough-talking, no-nonsense sort of guy with a soft spot. John Harker, on the other hand, I can't even tell you what kind of personality he has, he's just that boring. I mean, hell, the security guard at the insane asylum was more memorable than John Harker. The film was directed by Todd Browning, who also directed Freaks. I talked about most of this movie's ups, but what are these movies' downs? Well, there are two. The problem with this movie is that once they find out that Dracula's a vampire, the plot kind of drags without a whole lot to do. So slow. And there are definitely slow parts.
Could you be any slower? Don't answer that.
And the effects and where Dracula is in bat form do look kind of fake. And the bat looks like something you find at a Halloween thrift store. I give this film 5 stars. Well, that's pretty much all I have to say about Dracula. But tune in for the next review as we end off this Halloween trilogy of Halloween reviews with Frankenstein. But until then, I'm Henry R. Mockingbird, your host with the mustache, signing off. Like, and subscribe to the channel and ring bell for future uploads. If you like to make a movie request on this channel, do so in the comment section below. And feel free to check out my other shows, Modern Classics, TV Treasures, and Geek Reviews. And check out my editorials.